Son, and of the Holy Spirit, God is one. Amen. Well, good morning, everybody. I think there's just me and one other person there. Might be two other people there as well. It's still not the most beautiful of days here. I think we can say, I noticed yesterday that the leaves and everything else are beginning to look rather sort of tattered and beginning to look autumnal. Thinking, oh my goodness, we're already entering into autumn. We've not had summer. There we go. We'll just have to put up with that, I think, this year. Nothing to be done about it. I can see that Bev has turned up. Good morning, Bev. And also Dino, good morning. I hope your son is well. And Stella as well. Good morning, God bless you. Hope things are going nicely for you as well. And here's Ahmed. Good. Right. Anyway, plenty to get on with today. We're going to be going back to do the Bible studies. So the Father Philip summer specials have come to an end. I hope they were useful to you. One or two people seem to find it helpful, and it seems to answer various questions that have been asked. So maybe we'll have a sort of Christmas special or something later on, nearer Christmas, obviously. Good morning, Joe. Well, I guess it's probably midday for you, isn't it? Hope everything's going well for you. Right. Today we're going to be looking at Acts chapter 15, verses 30 to 41. We'll see how we get on with that. I've just seen that Frank has turned up as well. Morning, Frank. Right, let's get going then. So, chapter 15 of Acts of the Apostles, verses 30 to 41. The background is that the church in Jerusalem has written to the Gentile Christians of Antioch and other places, that sounds like a good idea, Joe. Written to the people of Antioch, and they are saying to them, essentially, you don't need to be circumcised, you don't need to become Jewish in order to become Christian, but keep some basic rules. Verse 30. So when they were sent off, they came to Antioch, and when they had gathered the multitude together, they delivered the letter. When they had read it, they rejoiced over its encouragement. Now Judas and Silas themselves, being prophets also, exhorted and strengthened the brethren with many words. And after they had stayed there for a time, they were sent back with greetings from the brethren to the apostles. However, it seemed good to Silas to remain there. Paul and Barnabas also remained at Antioch, teaching and preaching the word of the Lord with many others also. Then, after some days, Paul said to Barnabas, let us now go back and visit our brethren in every city where we have preached the word of the Lord and see how they are doing. Now Barnabas was determined to take with them John called Mark, but Paul insisted they should not take with them the one who had departed from them in Pamphylia and had not gone with them to the work. Then the contention became so sharp that they departed from one another. And so Barnabas took Mark and sailed to Cyprus. But Paul chose Silas and departed, being commended by the brethren to the grace of God. And he went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening all the churches. Okay, there we are. So verses 30 to 32. It's be interesting to see how they deal with conflict and disagreement and what this means for us as well. So when they were sent off, they came to Antioch, and when they had gathered the multitude together, they delivered the letter. When they had read it, they rejoiced over its encouragement. Now Judas and Silas themselves, being prophets also, exhorted and strengthened the brethren with many words. So it actually means when it says they gathered together everybody, gathered the multitude together, it's quite interesting. The word used there in Greek is synagogued. So they synagogued who? The pleros, not an ochlos, the many. Ochlos being an unruly crowd, but the pleros, the many together. Gathered all the people together. So in Antioch, the church is actually quite large already. and they gather together the whole lot of them. Because the message is not just to the leaders of the church, but to the entirety of the church. So there would have been young people there, older people there, rich people there, poor people there, Jewish people there, Gentiles there, and so on. The whole lot of them gathered together, a group of people. And so that's the first thing they do. The second one is they deliver the letter to be read. The third thing that happens is that this is then backed up by two witnesses, Judas and Silas from Jerusalem. These are the ones who are there, and what they're going to do is be witnesses that this letter is genuine and back it up with their own words. Okay? And these preachers do two things. Okay? So Silas and Judas and Silas themselves being prophets, they do two things. Firstly, they exhort, and secondly, they strengthen the brethren with many words. And that is important. Now, with the exhorting, the Greek word there is parakalesan, and you probably know parakalo in Greek. So you might say, parakalo, will you do this, that, or the other? It's a nice way. So it's actually calling to myself, parakalo, calling to myself, it really means. And here what they're doing is they're calling closer to God. So not to themselves, but they're calling people closer to God. And this is what preaching should be about. Actually taking the people and taking the message and using it to bring people closer to God in understanding and in knowledge and in the relationship between you and God. Because if you just know something, paraklesis, yes it is, and if you just know something, that's not as good as knowing someone. Okay, knowing someone. So you might know about them, but you need to know them. So parakalo, bringing them nearer to God. And the other word that is used in English is translated strengthen the brethren. This actually means a whole series of things, including strengthen, but it's also about re-establishing them. So, and this gives the idea that they are established already, now they're doubly established. So they are really strengthened, made strong, brought towards Christ, and doubly established. Rejoice. And the result of that, verse 31, is they rejoiced over its encouragement, over being re-enheartened. Okay? And again, this idea of rejoicing has the background of simply to be. That's interesting. And this background idea that when you are rejoicing, you are. So somebody who is joyful and rejoicing is somebody who is. Okay? So it gives the idea of being more your normal self. So we might say we have joy in the Lord. This means we are more our normal selves when we have God. There's some who are bound to disagree with that, but that's the way that it's going to be. As you come closer to God, you are more yourself. You see this actually within the icons. The closer you come to Christ, the bigger things become. So the perspective opens up and becomes where Christ is the largest thing as the icon, then everything else diminishes the further away you get from him. And we're furthest away, so we're the smallest thing in the relationship we have within the icon. Okay, but the closer you come to him, the more you rejoice, the more you are, the more you are. Okay, that's an interesting little idea there. And by Silas and Judas coming from Jerusalem, they establish the authority of Paul and Barnabas. So it's like here, let us say, I can do all sorts of stuff, but from time to time, the bishop will turn up and he'll do all sorts of things, and sometimes bishops say things like to thank Father Philip for all the stuff he's done within the church and all that sort of thing. Well, actually, they don't do that. But that's for that wretched Father Philip. But the fact the bishop has turned up establishes the authority of the priest under the bishop. So everybody else looks and says, okay, that priest that we have, we might think he's a complete Charlie, but on the other hand, the bishop is establishing his authority within this parish. So we'll have to keep up with the priest after all. Okay. Good morning to Suzanne and Natalia and Joan, and also I think to Frank and Gary. Good morning. Verse 33 and 34. And after they had stayed there for a time, they were sent back with greetings from the brethren to the apostles. However, it seemed good to Silas to remain there. He doesn't explain why, it just seemed good to him. So the majority of those people who came from Jerusalem now return back to Jerusalem. That's where their work and their life and their ministry is meant to be. They need to go back home and continue with what they were doing there. And by doing that, they also leave the coast clear for Paul and Barnabas to do what they think is right. They leave them there and to get on with it. A bit like, the bishop might come here, he looks at various things, he might make some suggestions, which he always does do. Well, not so much suggestions, he tells us to do things, which we then get on with. And then having done that, he doesn't sit there and micromanage every single thing. He says, right, okay, I've left Father Philip behind here. He can carry on with the work that I'm establishing here. And they're doing the same thing. Silas, possibly also called Silvanus, it's a bit difficult to tell within the tradition whether Silas and Silvanus are two people or one person. It's quite interesting, even in different parts of the Orthodox Church, there seem to be different traditions about whether Silas and Silvanus are the same person or two different ones. They're celebrated on the same day, either as one person or as two. Very similar histories. Okay, anyway, Silas decides to stay behind, and Silas quite frequently is thought to be the person you talk to prisoners about, because he also ended up in jail. Anyway, Paul and Barnabas, verse 35, also remained in Antioch, teaching and preaching the word of the Lord with many others also. So there's an emphasis here on the word of the Lord. They're not preaching about the church, they're not preaching about all sorts of other peripheral things. They're teaching the word of the Lord. The word of the Lord is Christ our God. So they're preaching about Christ himself. They're bringing Christ before you. Okay? And this is always what we must do when any of us talk about Christianity. There are lots of side issues, like I said in the last few days, but what we need to do is focus our attention and focus other people's attention on the Lord. So they might have a passing interest in church and churchianity and iconography and vestments and incense and Byzantine music and all sorts of things like that. They might be really skilled and really knowledgeable about that. But all of that needs to be focused upon Christ. And when it is, then we are preaching the word of the Lord. The other thing to say about that is the two things they're doing. What were they doing? They were teaching and preaching. So the teaching itself, building other people up, didaskontes, it says in Greek. So straightforward teaching. This is how to understand this. And it's interesting, there's a book called The Teaching of the Apostles, called the Didache. It's spelled Didache, Didache, and that is a early Christian writing, well worth reading, and you can see the sort of teaching that the apostles did. It's also worthwhile reading things like the letters of St. Ignatius of Antioch, who almost certainly was one of the people that St. Paul and Barnabas was teaching. And he then goes on to be martyred later on, as you know, and he leaves behind himself letters to different people and churches. And these letters contain the early teaching of the apostles, and much more fully described than anything we get in the letters or the Acts of the Apostles. They didn't tend to say what should happen in Acts of the Apostles or in the letters. They tended to correct misunderstanding. So in these other places, you discover things that are positive. So if you've not read them, let me advertise them to you again. So the letters of St. Ignatius of Antioch, and also the Didache, spelled Didache, D-I-D-A-C-H-E, pronounced Didache. And if you can get those, then that is great. You can find them, Holy Narrow Door, easily online. If you just put in Didache and the letters of St. Ignatius of Antioch, they'll come up. You'll find them. You can buy books, they're easily found. The letters of St. Ignatius, the Shepherd of Hermas, the Didache, the Martyrdom of Polycarp, letter of Clement, all of which are well worth reading, are to be found in a book called Early Christian Writings, published by Pelican. I guess it's probably about £11, $20, something like that. You should be able to get it on Amazon, either brand new or second hand. Well worth reading. Really well worth reading. Okay? So they taught and they preached. And the word they're preaching is actually translating the word evangelizing. So they're doing two things. They were bringing new people in, and they were teaching the people who are already there. And those two things are really important. There's no point at all in bringing people in if you don't teach them. And there are churches, even in this city here, where they bring people in but don't teach them. There are other churches in this city here where they teach people but they don't bring anybody new in. And those two things need to be done together. So there needs to be an outward, I'll write it down underneath Narrow Door. They need to be doing outreach and preaching, evangelizing, and then with the people who are there, they need to be teaching. And it may well be that you need two different sorts of people for doing that. One lot who are preachers and teachers, evangelists and so on, and another lot who are solid teachers who will take this small amount that people have got to know, come to know, and then they teach them what they need to know according to their ability to know it. The two things often don't mix terribly well. So it's quite a good idea that you do the two things together. You often find too that evangelism, certainly in the Orthodox Church, seems to be a bit of a dirty word, partly because they see evangelicals on our streets doing similar things on the street corners in Moscow and Greece and other places, handing out biblical tracts, which is in its own way laudable, but is done in such a crass way that it has a negative rather than a positive effect. So it has to be done really incarnating yourself into the area and then teaching and preaching all the time. Not quite sure what I'm doing at the moment. I tended to be teaching, but I'm quite amazed how many people have come to Christ through these videos and have been baptized all over the world, which is amazing. So maybe I'm intending to teach, but in fact preaching. Whatever it is I'm doing, I hope I am concentrating on Christ. Okay? Preaching the word of the Lord with many others also. And that is also important. So Paul and Barnabas did not keep this preaching and teaching enterprise to themselves. They must have trained up other people. Okay? They're doing the teaching and preaching with many others also. They trained up other people. And this training up of other people is another thing that the church must always do. So I know that I'm involved in that little enterprise as well, even now. And the whole church needs to be so. The whole church really scouring the congregations, finding people who can be trained up for the work of the whole church. And there's a great variety of what we mean by that. Verse 36. Good morning, Harry. That's not what it says. Then after some days, Paul said to Barnabas, "Let us now go back and visit our brethren in every city where we have preached the word of the Lord and see how they are doing." So he wants to go and strengthen those places they have already missionized. A great thing to do. They have left people behind, if you remember, and now what they need to do is go back and just check up on everything, correct things that have gone wrong, re-establish the church in different places, and so on. He could have stayed in Antioch in relative safety and in more comfort, looking after himself, but he chooses now to retrace his steps, to strengthen what he's already achieved. So it's not just important to set up a church, but it's important then to keep that church within the ambit of the rest of the church. Otherwise, it'll go its own way and get lost. And this is how heresy and other things like that come into the church. It constantly needs to be guided and gently tillered towards Christ himself. Good morning, Isidore. God bless you. Very nice soup. Thank you very much. Nobody else understand that, but he will. Okay. Verse 37, 38. Now Barnabas was determined to take with him John called Mark, but Paul insisted that they should not take with them the one who had departed from them in Pamphylia and had not gone with them to the work. So enter St. Mark again. He disappeared from Acts of the Apostles, and we haven't seen him for a bit, but now he reappears. When he disappeared in Pamphylia, he simply went back home. And there appears to be, though it's slightly glossed over by St. Luke, that there had been some sort of weakness within St. Mark, or lacking on his part, that had meant that he had disappeared. When things got tough, St. Mark got going and went home, whereas the other two stayed with it. So St. Paul doesn't want him to come again. Now, what else do we know about St. Mark? Well, by tradition, he's the one who wrote Mark's Gospel. By tradition, he's also the one who joined St. Peter in Rome for some time and went around with St. Peter. And we do know that St. Mark knew St. Peter. If you look back in Acts of the Apostles to chapter 12, you'll find that when St. Peter was released from prison by the angel, he goes to St. Mark's house. And you remember dear old Rosie, so excited that she rushes back in while St. Peter's still knocking on the door. And poor old Rosie, smashing her plates and stuff all the time. And finally they let Peter in, and it's Mark's house that happens to. We're pretty sure that St. Mark is the one who was a youngster at the time. Maybe this is just a problem, that Mark is too young. A youngster at the time, so I guess he would have been in his 20s by now, at least, who ran off naked into the garden because the Romans had grabbed him by his imation, and he had struggled out of that and run away. Hamartian is a sort of simple cloth or tunic, a bit like a toga, or like a large t-shirt. He struggled out of it, ran away completely naked. It's quite amusing. I've often wondered what happened next. Did he cover himself in leaves and branches and wriggle his way back home? Or did one of the other disciples find him and give him their turban or something to wear? Anyway, we also find, by tradition also, St. Mark came from North Africa, from a place called Pentapolis, which you've probably heard of. So this Pentapolis via St. Nectarius of Pentapolis. So Mark came from Pentapolis, North Africa, and so this explains why it would be that he would also go back to North Africa later on to found the church in Alexandria, having been with Barnabas in Cyprus. Okay? Maybe I am muddling up the two. Harry. So, it's also by tradition that Mark owned the room that was the upper room where our Lord had the Last Supper. So there are all sorts of traditions about Mark. The inner truth is we know very little about him. We assume that he wrote Mark's Gospel, and there are plenty of early church fathers who say that, but there are also early church fathers who say something different, that the person who wrote it was Mark, but not Mark as in John Mark, this Mark. There are others also who divide up the different Marks. So the Mark in Jerusalem that Peter goes to is not the same Mark that joined Paul in Lystra, Derbe, Pamphylia, and so on. So on this one, you pay your money, you take your pick. But what is interesting is this, that Paul is clearly less forgiving than Barnabas. This might be because, according again to tradition, Mark is Barnabas's cousin, and therefore Barnabas takes him with him. Okay? Verse 39. Then the contention became so sharp that they parted from one another. And so Barnabas took Mark and sailed to Cyprus, but Paul chose Silas and departed, being commended by the brethren to the grace of God. Right, well, do you notice the way that God allows us to keep our own characters and temperament? And here we get two strong-minded people in contention with each other. A contention so sharp that they decide, what's the word that St. John Chrysostom uses? Advisedly. They separate advisedly. They're not going to get over this argument. They're going to be grumbling, if Mark doesn't come, then Barnabas is going to be cross about it. If Mark comes, then Paul is going to be cross about it. So they decide to separate their ways. One goes one way, the other one goes the other way. Barnabas takes Mark and Paul takes Silas. And we find this sort of temperament and different sorts of characters a lot, don't we, within the Bible. God doesn't make everybody even-tempered. He doesn't make everybody the same sort of person. There are different sorts of temperament. Yeah, hot Mediterranean temperament. Oh my goodness. Don't I know about that? You go even further east, you'll find it even more so. Don't know at what point people start getting more gentle. Maybe on arrival in California, when you've gone that far east, according to, I know that's San Francisco, isn't it? We will meet gentle people there. What's the name of the guy who sang that? I've gone out of my mind. So somebody like Moses was famously gentle, whereas Elijah is famously austere. They're very different sorts of people, although Moses also was able to be disheartened, upset, angry, even violent. Elijah also very austere, very violent. Elisha too. John the Baptist, very austere, out in the wilderness. That's his sort of temperament. And the Lord says, John was like somebody playing a funeral dirge, whereas the Lord was somebody like playing a wedding march. So that, John came fasting, the Lord comes feasting. Paul is strict and austere, whereas Barnabas is tender and indulgent. That's just the way it is. You find the same nowadays, don't you? Exactly the same in the modern church. So if you think about some modern saints, I'm not going to go through all of them, but you can probably think about some yourself, or even think about people different clergy or different members of the church that in your heart are very good Christian followers who have absolutely different temperaments. I always think of someone like St. Paisius and St. Porphyrios, very different temperaments of those two. But you have lots of different sorts of characters who become saints. You just need to go along and look at the walls of any church, and you see some of them are warrior saints, some of them mothers, some of them monks and nuns and bishops, some of them are doctors. So you have all that sort of thing. Some are very, very cultured people, and some are peasants. And some are cheerful, extrovert, outward-looking. Others are more introvert, inward-looking. Some are academic, some are illiterate, some are wealthy, some are poor, and so it goes on. So all of these sort of attributes of somebody and the way that they come to Christ are interesting in themselves, and God doesn't actually take that away from you, but he divinizes it. So somebody like Saint Matrona of Moscow, who is blind and poor and illiterate, her blindness, her poverty, her illiteracy, her living in the back streets becomes divinized, and she becomes one of our most popular saints within that part of the world and elsewhere as well, of course. Other people like, St. Luke the physician, highly educated, highly skilled, a great bishop and a surgeon. All of these things that he has become divinized, and he also becomes one of our really popular saints of nowadays. So these sorts of things, they could hardly be more different. Had not a great deal in common, except that their lives revolved around Christ. And when we think about it in that way, you can see that actually they had a huge amount in common. Okay? So, did they end up hating each other? And some people say, oh, you can see, the way that the church didn't really change them much. Well, they agreed to differ, and they went their separate ways. But later on, if you just do a trawl through the New Testament, the letters of St. Paul, you'll find that St. Paul quite often sends greetings, they're called encomiums, to St. Barnabas, his fellow worker, really loving him and really admiring him and so on, okay? And so he talks really positively about Barnabas. So they parted advisedly, dividing the task and the world between them. So I ain't having nothing more to do with that, Mark. Mark was saying, I didn't want to go with you anyway. So they divide the area between them, and each of them then works in peace. But they keep in touch with the other one. Doubtless they carried on praying. And nowadays, I dare say, they're all sitting together in heaven. And verse the 41st, and he went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the churches. So this is what St. Paul did. goes up into Syria, probably goes back into places like Damascus and so on, and his work is then again refounding, retreading, making sure that the churches are left in a strong situation so that he can move on. Okay, so despite the fact that they have an argument and they go their separate ways, even this shows God's providence in that their separation bears fruit. Right, good. Let's see if anybody's been saying anything. Oh yeah, let me remind myself to write down that word, the key. And I'll see if I can find a link for you, narrow door. I'm not quite sure what Joan's beautiful idea was, but there we are. Or maybe being brought closer. Yeah, brought closer to the Mother of God or somebody. Good morning to Suzanne and Teaching of the Apostles. I'll deal with that. D-I-D-I-C-H-E. Good morning, Harry and Isidore. John the Theologian has clothes removed. I'll have to have another look at that. Maybe both did. Stella says, hot Mediterranean temper. Yes, indeed. And Joan finds herself 100% guilty of that one. But she loves St. Luke the Physician, one of my favourite saints, patron saints. Beard says, Harry, are also very different among men. Yeah, we don't all grow the same beard. Some people grow really short beards, some people grow thick and luscious beards. My beard is somewhere in between the two. I think it's quite brittle, because when I brush it, lots of bits sort of fall out, break off. Lack of patience, Dino says, have I changed my email? No, I haven't. But it might, if you sent me something, it might have gone into my spam folder, so I'll have to have a look there. But you did send me a picture of Simon the other day, which I did answer. So that my answer might have gone into your spam folder. You have a very handsome son, Dino. Joan says, the beautiful idea was that being joyful was being more like oneself. Oh yes, of course, yeah. Stella and Joan having their own little chat about being bad-tempered. Okay, 13 days back, no problem, maybe in your spam folder. I'll have a look. But send me another email if you like, and I'll have a look in the spam folder, because after so many days, and I can't remember how many there are, my spam folder automatically empties itself. So anything, I can't remember how long it is. It might be every week or every 2 weeks, something like that. It just sort of, they drop off the bottom. So I'll have a look. You might have to send me another one. Okay, but anyway, we are praying for you and for your son all the time, regularly. So let's get the list of people to pray for. Need to update it. So if you could pray, carry on praying, please, for Constantine, Andre, and Sam, all of whom died recently. We're praying for each of them for 40 days. Constantine Andre drowned in a fishing accident in America. Andre, aged only 11, the day before his birthday, and Constantine having taken his son out. What a terrible thing for that poor man. His last thoughts as his son disappeared. Must have been terrible. Sam and his parents as well, also very young. And then please pray for Nicholas, who's now lost his ability to speak, or even move his mouth. Probably is nearing the end. For Nicoletta and Nicoletta, there are two Nicolettas. One is not terribly, both of them not so well at the moment. For Daniel, who we're praying for all the time, and our banging on the inside of God's door seems to be helping because he should have been dead over a year ago and he's still alive and appears to be getting better, and that is a miracle of both us praying and of science. And those two things should always be done together. There's no difference between how we do these things. Pray also for Erin's Joseph and for Dino's son Simon, for Christina's daughter Elizabeth, and pray for Helena, whose husband and son have died. I see that Harry's asking us also to pray for Andreas, who died recently. I have been praying for Andreas. Okay, so if you pray for them, please, and if you can't remember the names, you can look them up again, or just the Lord knows who we're praying for, and just commend them to God. And for all of those who take part in these sessions as well. Right, in a moment I'm going to write down, I'll look up and see if I can find some links to ancient Christian writings, to the Didache, to the letters of St. Ignatius, and I'll put them in a pinned comment underneath here. Meanwhile, God willing, tomorrow, same time, same place, as he used to say in Batman and Robin, and we will find out what happens in chapter 16. And this, if you come from Europe, is going to be our chance to shine within the gospel, where the sainted lady Lydia becomes the first person baptized in Europe. Okay, read all about it. Chapter 16. Your prayers, God bless you. Be nice to have a bit of warm weather, wouldn't it? Okay, bye-bye then.